Please welcome Senator David Shoebridge from the Greens. David and the Greens have been decades-long supporters of cannabis law reform. And so it's particularly exciting that you're here on the election day because all the other politicians that we often host at MardiGrass are all doing other things. So very appreciative, David, that you've taken the time to come here and share with us today because the Greens have been at a federal level, thanks to David's sort of hard work, actually spearheading very interesting and sensible, basically cannabis legalisation. After polling a lot of people and getting a lot of feedback from the community on what would be best. Definitely, if you look at the Greens' policy to do with cannabis legalisation, I think a lot of you would be very thrilled about it because it does include a lot of very sensible things like homegrown. So David, you're going to really let us know how the Greens are leading the charge on this and talk really more about how we could have a safe and well-regulated market for Australia. David Shoebridge.
I'll start by acknowledging we're on First Nations land and pay our collective respects. And one of the reasons why you do that is because it's not only acknowledgement of the ongoing connection with country, it's not only deeply respectful about a culture that's been here for tens and tens and tens of thousands of years, but also, we're talking now about cannabis law reform. And we know that the current drug laws are actually one of the chief tools that the police across the country use to get in the face of First Nations peoples, to stop and search young First Nations men, to go into homes, stop cars, and often leads to a cycle of confrontation with First Nations peoples, which ends up with, offensive language, resist arrest, assault police, and it all starts with often a search on suspicion of possession of cannabis. And so if you look at the offence rates, and in New South Wales, there's a diversion program available for people to get a caution if they're caught with cannabis possession. And you look at the numbers, and my state colleagues in the state parliament, Sue Higginson and Abigail Boyd and others, they've crunched the numbers and had a look at how that caution works. And it's deeply racist. It's racist against First Nations peoples. First Nations peoples have about a fraction the likelihood of getting a caution from the cops, far, far more likely to get charged and taken to the courts, getting a criminal record for the possession of cannabis than a non-First Nations person. Entrenched racism in how those cannabis laws operate. It's part of a broad racist bent in our criminal justice system against First Nations peoples, but the pointy end for many First Nations communities is drug laws and particularly cannabis possession. So let's acknowledge it's Bundjalung land and let's, as part of walking together with First Nations peoples, fix up these racist laws. And I'd put in that mix, near the top of that mix, getting rid of the criminalisation of the possession of cannabis and legalising cannabis. So, thanks. Because I'm a good Green senator, I woke up very early this morning and actually went up onto some Bundjalung land up at Nightcap. And, it's a gorgeous part of the planet too. And I know we're talking here about legalising cannabis, but, we've got a federal election coming. And if you prize this beautiful part of the world, like so many other beautiful parts of the world, we have an absolute obligation to actually put nature into this election. And so if you haven't voted yet, I'd ask you to think about nature. Think about those beautiful national parks. Think about a safe climate. Think about what climate we want to leave our kids and our grandkids, keeping coal and gas in the ground, and vote for that future. When you go there, think of Nightcap National Park. Think of the things you prize on this planet and vote with that in mind. As much as this is a cost of living election, let's not forget the planet's at stake as well. Right. So, this is my first term in the Federal Senate. I was a state MP for a bit over a decade, and with my state colleagues in New South Wales, fought to change the laws, get rid of those stupid drug driving laws. And I want to commend Steve and David and others who have been doing great work challenging those drug driving laws through the courts, as magistrates, as lawyers. But the real problem is Parliament, right? Parliament has put in place a bunch of deadhead laws at a state level in particular that mean that if you're caught with the smallest perceptible amount of cannabis and you're driving, No question, it wasn't impairing your driving. Bang. You caught once, you might get off with a Section 10, caught twice, guaranteed to lose your licence, pay a serious fine. That's not a road safety law, that's an ideological law about drugs dressed up as a road safety law. At a state level, we see thousands and thousands of police every week devoting their time to stopping and searching, particularly young people, First Nations people, but we know it's anyone who lives in a regional community, poorer communities, policing them on drugs. And at the top of that is cannabis, with their drug dogs and their searches. Countless thousands of hours each week of police time. Sometimes queues in the courts when the drug driving charges are up or when the possession charges are up in Campbelltown, in Lismore, across the country, but particularly regional and poorer communities, policing drug laws. And when you crunch the data nationally, we realise that every year there's about 60,000 people driven into the criminal justice system by our current laws making the possession or the manufacture, the growing of cannabis illegal. And of those 60,000 people, overwhelmingly every year, they're people being dragged into the criminal justice system for basic possession, for having one or two joints in their pocket. 60,000 people a year, every year, being ground through the criminal justice system because of possession. And yes, it's bad in New South Wales, but in many ways it's worse in the NT and WA, where they're even more racist policing. Bad in Queensland, bad across the country. And while the police are devoting billions and billions of dollars of public resources and courts and jails, billions of dollars of public resources being wasted in that effort, we also ask ourselves who wins from making it illegal? Like who is currently winning from these bizarre set of laws which sort of rolled out from a sort of racist campaign in the 1950s? Who are the big winners? Well, the police are, because they get more resources, they get more powers, they get more ability to be intrusive in our lives. The police like that. They tick. They'll call that a win. Who else wins? Well, organised crime groups, bikie gangs, drug importers, people who have, for the better part, a gross lack of morals, willing to exert violence, willing to corrupt our police, corrupt our courts, corrupt our system, and they're making billions. They're making billions. So you set up a system. I mean, who would do this? You set up a system that makes a natural product illegal. You set up a system that means you can't monitor the quality of the product. You can't monitor if there's additives in it, growth hormones in it, chemicals in it. You hand the regulation over to organised crime and bikie gangs, and I don't know about you, I don't think they're big into regulation and public interest regulation. They're not big into organic grow. You divert countless thousands of hours of police resources, which could otherwise be spent on domestic violence and things that we actually want police to be addressing their attention to. You waste the time of courts, you have to build new jails, and you deliver excessive powers to police, which then end up being abused, and we know they're abused. And who gets the financial profits, apart from the overtime that the police get and the extra police stations? Who gets the financial profits? Organised crime figures, some of the worst people in the country. I mean, who the hell would come up with that system? Well, the answer is the Labor Party and the Coalition. That's who comes up with that system, and they back it in and they love it. And I've got to say, at a state level, the state police forces and the state police unions have an incredibly close relationship with both the Labor Party and the Coalition. Like, they wash in and out. They kind of feed off each other. And they also have a very close relationship with right-wing shock jocks. And they know how to get into those right-wing shock jocks and feed law and order attacks. And that's how you get, for example, the Minns government in New South Wales changing our bail laws last year to put more kids in jail, because a bunch of shock jocks and the police got in their ear and said, if you don't do this, we're going to attack you and we're going to campaign against you. That's how you got the Queensland government last year changing their bail laws so that the criminal law operates more harshly against kids on the same offence in Queensland than it does for adults, consciously and deliberately. It's harsher for kids, harder for kids to get bail than for adults to get bail in Queensland. And it was a conscious, deliberate part of the design. Breaches all of our international obligations about the rights of a child, breaches all of our basic sense about how the criminal justice system should work, should not be harsher against kids than adults for the same offence. I mean, it's so obviously wrong. How did that happen? Well, both the Coalition and Labor voted those laws through. The only party in that parliament that opposed it was the Greens. How did it happen? Well, it happened because of this close relationship between the police unions, the police, right-wing shock jocks, and the Labor Party and the Coalition at a state level. They swim in the same fetid pond of angry, nasty, vicious responses to any social problem. They swim in that same pond. And it was my observation at a state level that it's going to be incredibly hard to get the kind of reforms we need in the big states, particularly on the East Coast. We have had reform in the ACT. And I'll tell you how we got reform in the ACT. We got reform because neither the Labor Party or the Coalition control that parliament by themselves. And they haven't now for decades. And it shits them, I'll be honest. They think they have some right to control that place. They can't believe that they have to share power with any other political party. And in the ACT, they've been sharing power with the Greens now for over a decade. And they hate it. They hate it. But the Greens in the ACT have used that power. And they've used the ability to get in and talk to a progressive electorate in the ACT so that the ACT, with minority government, is the only jurisdiction in the country that has removed a bunch of laws about cannabis possession, that basically lets you grow a couple of plants without the police coming in and knocking on your door. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because people voted for a parliament that was actually going to reflect their values, and we got a minority parliament in the ACT. Now, I feel lucky to be here with you for 45 minutes today, but I'm going to go straight out after this to go and hand out for the Greens, and go and hand out and see if we get Mandy Nolan elected in Richmond in the lower house, because I desperately want to see our federal parliament become a minority parliament. And I don't want to see Anthony Albanese have a big rubber stamp and be able to just determine what the hell the priorities of the country should be without having to talk to anybody. I don't know if you've been watching the last 3 years. It's bloody uninspiring what that man does. And the sort of small team of kind of think small, think little, make Gina happy crew that lives with him inside the Labor caucus. And heaven help us if, that fool Dutton manages to win this election, what damage he would do to this country. His fight on woke, inviting Donald Trump around, although they both want to invite Donald Trump, as it turns out, Albanese and Dutton. But just think about the damage that bloke would do. I mean, thankfully, this election campaign has put a bit of a spotlight on him, and the more you look, the less you like when it comes to the Australian people. But we want to make sure that this parliament isn't just a rubber stamp for Labor, because it doesn't work. It means that they don't have to listen to key social campaigns. They don't have to listen to people who didn't vote for them. They don't have to listen to that millions of Australians who want things to be different and know that we actually, if we want to keep this democracy safe, if we want to keep people engaged, things have got to change. And the truth is, nothing changes if nothing changes. So I'm going to go from here and hand out for Mandy Nolan. I'm going to tell you that because she would be bloody amazing as a local member for the Northern Rivers. I know she's the electorate across the way, but if you know anyone there, get on the phone, send them a text, get them to put Mandy in Parliament because she'd be bloody good. And a minority parliament is how we get law reform in this space. And I know this because I tried with a majority parliament in the current parliament. Well, the one that just ended. And we got together a piece of legislation that was the first time ever that we had legislation presented in the federal parliament to legalise cannabis, not just for one state or for one territory, and not decriminalisation, but full-on legalisation to create a legal market where it can actually be jobs and quality control and public interest. We created that legislation through a collaborative process with the community. We pulled together a draft bill. Our draft bill had the pretty, I would have thought, important core principles in it. You can grow up to 6 plants by yourself at home with no licence, no regulation, just no tax, mind your own business. We wanted to have a system that didn't just hand it over to big alcohol, big tobacco, in particular, or the pharmaceutical industry. And we said, in our draft bill, we put our draft bill out for presentation. We said, should we ban them? Should we ban big alcohol, big tobacco, big pharma from having a say? We said, should it be 6 plants? Should it be more or less that you can grow by yourself? We said, do you think there should be a national cannabis sales tax that we can do good stuff with? And we checked out the numbers, and it turns out with a 15% cannabis sales tax and 10% GST, everything has GST, you may not have noticed that, that's my life, your life, we can get $10 billion in additional federal revenue over the next decade, and billions more to go to the States. You can do a lot of good with $10 billion. You can build a quarter of a submarine. It's great. You can do great stuff at a federal level with $10 billion. You can build school halls. You can take climate action. You can pay nurses. You can do great stuff with $10 billion. We said, should it be 15%, 0%, 25%? And we put this draft bill out. And we said, and what should the criminal penalties be? Should we prohibit imports? Should we... what should we do to encourage small growers? What should we do? We got more than 9,000 people responding to our survey. More than 9,000 people. And overwhelmingly, I think it was 99.9% of them said, get on and legalise it. We basically love your bill, but can you do these little bits and pieces? And we improved our bill because we listened to what people said. We made sure that if you grow in 6 at home, and you decide to bake it into a nice brownie, you can share it with your friends. You can give it to your neighbours. You can take it over to your mum if she's got chronic pain. We made sure you could do that and no one would get criminalised. We made sure that the penalties fitted a new legalised scheme. And we particularly looked at the way the law operates for kids, and we didn't want to criminalise kids and have police stopping and searching and criminalising kids. And so the law was changed, our draft law was changed to say that if a minor is caught with cannabis, and the law prohibits minors, anyone under 18, from having access to cannabis in the recreational market, at least. Prohibits anyone selling to minors. But we said if a minor is caught with cannabis, the police can stop and search, and they can confiscate the cannabis, but we're not going to be criminalising kids under our system. You take the cannabis, confiscate the cannabis, but no criminalising of kids. We're sick of putting kids in jail for this sort of stuff. And we amended the bill and we took it to a Senate inquiry. And a Senate inquiry with our, buffed up bill from the benefit of 9,000 people having a look at it and saying how we can improve it. And I've got to tell you, by the way, has anyone else here made a submission about draft legislation? Because I tell you, that's not the world's most exciting thing to do, right? Normally if we go out and ask the people, well, hey, I've got some draft legislation on, I don't know, amending the way the import laws operate for medicinal cannabis, say, which I think we should do, absolutely, powerful. We'd get maybe 50 submissions if we really pumped it, right? 9,000. 9,000 people made submissions, and they made it better because we listened to what they said. The bill we took to the Senate inquiry was a great bill in my mind. It shows for the first time ever that you can create a national cannabis market. You can remove organised crime, bikie gangs out of it. The numbers that we got from the Parliamentary Budget Office, which are a bunch of boffins that tell you what the impact of legislation will be, they're not paid by me, they're independent boffins, like these guys sit there and price policies. They said that not only would we get $10 billion in revenue over the next decade, but also that we would squeeze out about 85 to 90% of the illegal market. It would just disappear. Because producing cannabis in a legal, well-regulated market is a bunch cheaper, as it turns out, than making it in an illegal market where you're hiding from police, you're paying people off, you can't invest in your growing cycle, And the Parliamentary Budget Office said that once you legalise cannabis, they looked at the Canadian experience, they looked at the US experience, they actually said the street price of cannabis, even with the 10% GST and 15% sales tax, the street price of cannabis would halve over the course of the decade, because we'd squeeze out all the inefficiencies in an illegal market. And we'd make a lot of efficiencies in a legal market. So I know we've got a cost of living election, right? But that's a cost of living measure, isn't it, as well? You know, halving the price of cannabis in the next decade, squeezing out organised crime, rediverting police resources to where we need it, maybe cutting police resources because we don't need as many, because they don't need as many cops going out and doing cop stuff. We've redefined cop stuff to not include policing cannabis. That's a good thing. Anyhow, we had, because this was run through the Senate, not through my office, it didn't have the same look and feel, we got hundreds of submissions to the bill, hundreds of submissions. And more than 9 out of 10 said, absolutely, get on and legalise it. Some of them said, oh, well, instead of growing 6 plants, we should be able to grow 24 plants because I want seedlings, I want mid-sized plants, I want tall plants, I want, you know, men and women all in the same room. Like, some people said 6 is too many, it should be 2. Some people said there shouldn't be any licensing schemes, should just be, you know, let it go. Some people said that the industry should pay for the regulation. Some people said that the public should pay for the regulation because you don't want industry capture. Like, there was some diversity of views, even amongst the people who, the 9 out of 10, more than 9 out of 10 who wanted it legalised. But every one of those submissions, hundreds and hundreds of submissions, said do this, get on and legalise it. And if you want to know one of the most remarkable moments, we had the New South Wales Police Union, who have been viciously against legalising cannabis for as long as I can remember. They came in, and I'd had a bit of engagement with them. I knew most of the key players. And I said, well, you know, what do you think? And they said, well, you know, maybe we should give it a go. Maybe we should give it a go. And I sent that to the Daily Telegraph, and they just, their head explodes, and they said, oh, we can't print that. The police union saying maybe we should give it a go. Well, maybe we should give it a go, eh? Anyhow, overwhelming support. We had some deadheads in the Australian Medical Association who said drugs are bad, people smoking cannabis is bad, legalised cannabis means people will smoke cannabis, some of them may be kids, therefore it's bad, therefore you should not legalise cannabis. I said to them, you do know that people in the country smoke cannabis now. You do know this? And they said, oh, yes, but we're talking about, you know, a legal market. I said, no, but you're health practitioners. You're meant to deal with evidence. You're meant to deal with reality. No one comes to you for ideology. They come to you for evidence. You do know that millions of people in this country currently smoke cannabis, and you do know it's unregulated, that they don't know what they're putting in their body, they don't know the strength of it, they don't know where it came from. You do know that's actually happening right now, don't you? Oh, yes. I said, well, do you think that's good? Do you think there might be a public health benefit in regulating it so people know what's going in their body? You can control it. You can get rid of contaminants. And also we'll have a bunch of revenue, so the small proportion of people who get a health impact from smoking cannabis, we can actually have the resources to actually help them, as well as people on other drugs. Have you thought, oh yeah, but drugs are bad. Drugs are bad. That was the AMA. Like these, and the answer is they've actually had a little bit of a coup, a right-wing coup in the leadership of the AMA, and it was literally ideology. But I point them out because they were so isolated. I think their only real friend was the South Australian Police Commissioner, who also turned up and said drugs are bad. And I said, well, what's your data? Oh, well, data. I said, well, you put a submission in, you know, what's your data say? How many people are getting busted for possession? Oh, I couldn't tell you. I said, you're the bloody Deputy Police Commissioner for South Australia. You should know some basic data before you come and give evidence to a Senate inquiry. I wasn't expecting to be asked any questions. I thought it was cops all over. Overwhelming support for it. And then we took it to a vote, and Labor and the Coalition just voted it down because they could. And Labor said they'll never progress it in the last Parliament. Anthony Albanese, who used to be pro for legalising cannabis, used to be pro-Palestine, basically used to not be Anthony Albanese as we now know, he said, no, not under his Prime Ministership would you get legalised cannabis. Well, the lesson I took from that was that the Parliament doesn't work. Like, it literally doesn't work. You can get all the evidence. you can get the overwhelming majority of key stakeholders. You can even have a cops union on board. You can see all of the compelling reasons, the public revenue, the public health, the removing criminal elements, redirecting police resources. Every single argument can be put on a platter in front of them. And because they don't have to think about it, they don't. And because they're worried that maybe, I don't know, Ben Fordham or whoever his toxic equivalent in Melbourne is, might have a run against them, they're unwilling to do what everybody can tell is in the public interest. My answer to that is, we'll do it again, right? I've got the bill. We'll present it again. There's 11 of my colleagues in the Senate. I can't tell you how many will be downstairs after after today. I hope a bunch more. We are committed to present it again because we did a couple of key things with that bill. We showed, first of all, that you can do it in one go. You can create a national, well-regulated, legal cannabis market, create a national regulator, allow the market to operate around the country, create thousands of new jobs, thousands of new businesses. Revenue can come in. We can redirect police resources. We keep people out of the criminal justice system. We can do it in one go. We showed how it can be done for the first time ever. And I can tell you in this election, there's a bunch of other people now saying, actually, you know what the Greens did? Yeah, we want a bit of that. We want to be legalising cannabis nationally because that's what's called opening the Overton window, right? In politics. It's called reimagining how politics can work, reimagining what a parliament can do, reimagining how we can change the world. And with that bill, we open the window. And so for the first time ever, you're getting people around the country saying, actually, yeah, the federal parliament should be about legalising cannabis. And I've got to tell you, one of the things I like about being a member of my party, which has state members and councillors and senators, is we do this work in layers. I do this work together with my state colleagues around the country, and they're all around the country. They take on the police, they take on the data, they feed it into me, I get the national data, feed it down to them, and then critically, we've got a suite of policies that covers environment, economic, social justice, criminal justice. And when we're engaging across that suite of policies in a minority parliament, we've got multiple pressure points to put against a minority Labor Party government. We've got multiple pressure points. We've got them in the environment, we've got them in social justice, we've got them in housing, we've got them in economics, we've got them in tax reform. We've got multiple pressure points. And I can't tell you, and I won't say to you, that if they get into minority parliament, if they get into a minority, top of our list is going to be legalised cannabis, because that is a party room decision. You know, last time I checked, there were 15 Greens in the party room. I don't get to decide that. But I can tell you this, we have committed as a collective in this parliament, this next parliament, to push to legalise cannabis for all the reasons I've said to you. And we will have, I hope, multiple pressure points against a minority Labor government. And we will do what we can so that we finally, having opened the window, we can maybe push Labor and the coalition out of it and finally legalise cannabis. And I think that'd be a bloody fun thing to do. So thanks very much for coming today.
Thanks so much, David. That was very inspiring. Do we have any questions for Senator Shoebridge? Yep. From the man in the wig.
G'day, mate. Thank you for being here. Thank you for that speech. That was fantastic. I'm just curious, and I won't print this. You don't have to give me names, but how many people in Parliament have you had a spliff with?
Well, I know I'm a good little senator, you know. I've been pretty good since I've been elected, state and federal. But what has been fascinating is the number of people, particularly from, say, the Nats from across the country, who have come across to me in the corridors and said, actually, Dave, mate, you know, I would vote for that. You know I would. You know it's stupid. You know I agree with you on everything. I loved what you said. I said, well, why don't you vote for it? Oh, no, can't vote for it, mate. Oh, no, can't vote for it. I can't tell you how many versions of that, conversations I've had at a state and a federal level. And I just think for me, like I appreciate those exchanges, right? That's nice. I appreciate that, you know, they're personally persuaded. But to be honest, I don't give a fuck if you're personally persuaded, if you're not willing to actually vote in accordance with your principles in Parliament. And yeah, it's good, but it shows what a problem we've got. But yeah, I'm not going to spill the beans. There were some people that surprised me who didn't vote for it. Like there really were. Jackie Lambie surprised me. She did not vote for it. And I said to her, have you seen your support base? Right? Working class support base, the ones who get whacked by the cops on this stuff. I said, have you seen your support base? You know, how do you justify not voting to get rid of that criminalisation of, you know, particularly working class people across the country? Oh, you know, all very tricky, very tricky. And David Pocock, right? Who I got a lot of time for. Like, I think he's genuinely in politics for the right reasons. But the argument he gave for not voting for it was, oh, it's a states' rights issue. Like, what the fuck? On that basis, you just shut down the Commonwealth Parliament, right? Because everything the Commonwealth Parliament does overrides state and territory laws. You know, people were looking for a reason to avoid the fight, instead of what I think you should be doing in politics is looking for a reason to do the right thing. And that does share me, I'll be honest. Yeah.
Nice. We've got a question here.
Hello, David. Thanks for being an advocate in the Parliament and introducing the laws for cannabis. I think you're doing a fantastic job. In terms of question, do you think with the police, you know, like the police attitude to cannabis, a campaign could be run around getting rid of these unjust laws will allow the police and the community to reform and to work in harmony again?
Yeah, and Miles, credit for your work trying to legalise too, and it's not just the last 6 months. I've seen you work in the space for years, so credit to that, Miles. I reckon, my view is there's multiple pressure points. Different people will change their mind or get passionate about it for different reasons. And there's a growing number of people who look at police wasting endless amount of time queuing up people in our local courts on cannabis possessions charges or drug driving charges. And don't take my word for it, take David Halpin's word for it, who, you know, one of the reasons David got jack of being a magistrate was just the endless amounts of time. What day was the drug driving court list, David, in Lismore Court? Wednesdays. Yeah, Wednesdays. You hear David, David will tell you himself, Wednesdays, you know, while you're trying to get to domestic violence matters, apprehended violence orders, trying to keep the community safe, instead you're dealing with, you know, dozens of these drug driving matters and putting people in jail not because they're a threat on the road. So there's a growing sense in the community that what a waste of time and energy that is, and that'll motivate some people. A bunch of other people will be motivated because they've seen people using medicinal cannabis and it's been bloody amazing. You know, they've actually seen their mum, their aunt, their friend who had chronic pain, who was addicted to endone, having that sort of life spiral that an addiction to sort of prescription opiates do. They've seen how their life can fundamentally change when they go on to medicinal cannabis. And they get their life and their spring and their appetite and they get rid of all the negative impacts. They'll be persuaded by that, right? There'll be other people who are persuaded by $10 billion you can build school halls with. And so I actually think having multiple pressure points is how we're going to win this campaign. And I've always been a believer of that, multiple pressure points, because we build a community, a big community. But yeah, I reckon people are absolutely jack of the police. Instead of doing what we want them to do, and, you know, I think police obviously have a role. I would like their role to be reduced, focused on actual violent crime and maybe white-collar crime and, you know, fraud, you know, bad drugs, bad stuff. But I think it's multiple. Yeah, thanks, Miles.
Just behind you, David.
David, one of the things we're confronting more recently, particularly from Chris Minns, is, there's no need to change the drug laws because everyone can get anything by prescription anyway. And I hear this constantly now as a reason from Labor Party people basically saying there's no need to change the drug laws because, you know, every man and their dog can do telehealth and get drugs. What's your response?
Well, first of all, that's not true. I mean, maybe Chris Minns in his comfortable upper middle class circles has enough people who can afford to get prescription cannabis. Maybe he's comfortable with that. Everybody he knows and chats to can afford a couple of $100 for the prescription medicine. Maybe that's true for Chris and the people he meets. It's not true for the people I meet who know that they can't afford prescription cannabis, but also more fundamentally how deceitful that is from the Premier, right? How deceitful from him and the Labor Party to say, we've set up a medicinal scheme that you actually want doctors to be using to help people with medical issues, sleep disorders, pain, PTSD, like this array of things that we know cannabis can be useful for. And you want them to be prescribing it like a doctor to deal with actual medical complaints. And instead, you've got the Premier and his mates saying, actually, it's okay to have a quasi-medical model and then actually use it as a kind of way of dispensing recreational drugs. That erodes faith in the medicinal cannabis industry. It erodes faith with the medical profession. And in fact, it's unethical. It's unethical for doctors to be prescribing on that basis. And when you talk to some of the growers, and there's a big grower just 20 minutes out of Lismore, up in Rouse. And I met with them actually yesterday morning. And what they will say is the way the current medicinal market is structured is it is encouraging basically business people to get into that model, to be importing lowest cost, who cares about the quality product from overseas, creating a business relationship there and then prescribing to patients based on how they maximise their profits from where they secure their supply, ignorant of the quality of the product, ignorant of the need to create a domestic industry, which I'm super passionate about, the jobs in a domestic industry. And that's not good for patients, it's not good for our domestic industry, and it erodes trust. So I'd say to Chris Minns, maybe get out of your comfortable little middle-class circle where that might work for you and see how it's working in the rest of the world, in the rest of the country, because it's working badly.
Thank you very much, David. I think we might have to wrap it up and get ready for the next speaker. Once again, thank you so much for taking time out today on this election day. Greatly appreciate your fondness for MardiGrass. And we wish you were sticking around longer, but understand you need to get away.
Yeah, well, happy MardiGrass, everybody. I want to just do credit to MardiGrass, like keeping the flame burning, so to speak, maintaining the kind of intensity. And I know this was a tough weekend because, I want to get out and persuade people how to change the country more broadly. But I want to thank you all also for coming. A traditional wet Mardi Gras.
Yes.
But thanks very much to MardiGrass too. Terrific work again. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, David. Thank you.